Ave Satanist, you're watching Sanctuary Satanica. How you doing? This video is a little different than my usual content. Most of the time I'm making content, if you just met me, most of the time I'm making content explicitly about Satanism, my relationship with Satan, or the occult and witchcraft, or my relationship with any given entity, or my experience therein, and this and that. This is a little different. This is a little more, this might reach some people outside of my niche. So I don't know how it will be received by those people should it reach them. But this is not just for my quote unquote community. That being said, like, I don't think that much of my words here will make that much of a difference for everyone. I know most people are very committed to hating themselves. This is something our culture normalizes. By our culture, I mean United States slash English culture. Those are both my cultures, and they're both very self-hating, self-deprecating, even though by contrast, I would say maybe the United States is more comfortable being self-centered and self-accepting. Whereas, in England, I've faced a lot more cognitive dissonance from people. They all manifest in different ways, and there is no one unified American culture, so speaking very generally. But I'm going to be mentioning things like unpacking Christianity, and by this I want people to understand that I don't really actually, I'm not really talking about religious Christianity in that instance. Religious Christianity is really easy to pick apart. I'm talking about the ways in which secular life has been Christianized. That is something that takes a lot more time to recognize in yourself. It's easy to recognize in other people, but it's harder to recognize it in yourself. So anyway, some of this shit might offend some people, and I think that's good. I think when you are practicing self-love, when you're practicing self-acceptance, which we'll get into in a second, you're more willing to be offended, if that makes sense. I'm not going to promise anyone that they won't be offended by anything, but I think it's good to be offended sometimes because it gives us a chance to evaluate our reactions and where they come from. Hello, shadow work. Okay, so before I get into the steps about self-love, I want to talk about some preliminary things you gotta do. Okay, this is just shit you gotta do. There is no self-love without self-acceptance. If I'm looking down, I'm looking at my notes. Accepting yourself is not this resolution to stop improving. That's the mistake I think a lot of us make, myself included, where I've settled for less, where I have demeaned myself, or just been like, oh, this is fine. Like, and I'm just accepting things the way they are, or I'm just being grateful. Gratitude is wonderful. Gratitude is wonderful, and it can be very uplifting. But when you are settling, you are telling yourself that you can't be more. Okay? And accepting yourself where you are right now is different than telling yourself that is where you will be. So when you practice self-acceptance, you have to do a lot of direct shadow work. And if you're someone else on my niche and you don't know what the fuck shadow work means, I'm talking about self-reflection in a structured and therapeutic fashion. And it can involve a therapist, but it doesn't have to. This is when you do exercises to confront the parts of yourself that you repress and that you deny and that you have cognitive dissonance about, that trigger you, etc. Not because you are trying to correct them as flaws. That's a mistake a lot of people make when they come to shadow work, is they come with this rejection of self, where they are act still as they do shadow work, are rejecting their shadow. That is not the point. That is not the point of shadow work. This is why I love the left-hand path. This is why I love Satanism, because Satanism helps promote being a human being. Anyway, so when you actually accept yourself where you are right now, and you have an ounce of admiration for yourself, or to understand where you are right now is because of where you were before, then you have a greater room for growth and expansion. And this is what is going to be the soil for self-love. Okay, well, it's basically like your goals are the seeds, self-acceptance is the soil, self-love is the fucking sunlight and water, all right, for this little garden. I don't know why I'm using a garden, but it's fine. like I said, cultural Christianity is a huge barrier here. There's also capitalism and consumerism. This is a huge one in both the cultures I mentioned previously, especially in the United States. A lot of people feel like, and speaking as a former sex worker, speaking as someone who is in the community of strippers, I was marketed to, and a lot of other strippers were marketed to, in this way of that self-love, it wasn't what we could spend on, what we could consume, and how consumable we could make ourselves. And I think that has leaked a lot into, as the mainstream has been appropriating sex work, at least the aesthetics of sex work, I have noticed how those same marketing tactics that are used to manipulate sex workers into spending thousands and thousands of dollars, that also goes into manipulating mainstream people into spending far more money on arbitrary accessories, procedures, etc. So there's that, and then the social pressure, self-deprecation culture, which, you know, you'll confront it as you go along, but I mentioned a lot of points on that. Basically, self-deprecation culture is how we are taught to prioritize mainly work, but sometimes family, and sometimes, you know, whatever institution over our own needs, no matter how basic and essential those needs are. So being aware of, Satanism says life is like a plane that's about to go down. You put your own fucking mask on before you put on someone else's. Does that make sense? Is that selfish? Fine. You know? Like, honestly. So, before we get into self-love, again, I want to talk about what love is and isn't, what your expectations of love are. Okay? I find that when people think love is a feeling, they're setting themselves up for disappointment. They're setting themselves up for failure. And they're going to be chasing this euphoric feeling that actually isn't love. And in order to chase that feeling, that euphoria, they have to put themselves in toxic situations where they can get it quickly, where it's unpredictable, where, you know, there'll be spurts of it here and there, which just make it more addictive to seek out that same feeling. Okay? Love is not a feeling. It is a commitment that you prove through action, okay? Knowing this, we understand that self-love is a series of habits and behaviors, okay? This is not about how the fuck you feel currently in this moment. Like I said, don't deny, this is the thing fucking self-help guru bitches get wrong. They tell you to say these fucking affirmations and all this, make a vision board and all this bullshit, okay? Fine, if you want to do that, fine. But I'm going to tell you, if you say to yourself, oh, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful, but you're staring at some fucking, like, crazy scar you have from a very traumatic accident in the mirror as you're saying it, and maybe, you know you're a beautiful person inside, but you just keep looking at yourself, and you know how people look at you, and you just feel ugly. Saying I'm beautiful on top of the feeling of I'm ugly creates cognitive dissonance. That does not help you build self-acceptance, and therefore does not help you build self-love, okay? So, instead, self-acceptance would have you say, I feel, emphasis on feel, not am, I feel ugly. Why do I feel ugly? Because these things happen to me and people treat me like this because I look like that, right? Okay, is other people's reaction to what happens to me my fucking problem? Just start to have thoughts like this where you question these statements you have. And then you decide, today, you know, when people stare at me like this and make me uncomfortable, I'm going to do something. I could confront them. I could ignore them. I could blast my music up in my headphones. I could walk away. I could cuss them the fuck out. I could say, what you looking at, bitch? You know, I could get into all that. These are all things you can do instead of retreat into yourself, okay? Because the pattern of self-deprecation and the pattern of self-hate is reinforced by how we perceive the world around us. So you gotta have to make a choice about how you're going to change your perception and change, not just your perception, but change your results, which happen from action, okay? Because you have to teach people how to treat you at the end of the day. And how you do that and the consequences of that are entirely up to you. All right. So it is not overnight. Like I said, in the example I gave, the person may be disfigured for life and still feel insecure about it from time to time. But having self-love is choosing to do things that alleviate insecurity and build security in self instead of tearing it down and feeding into insecurity. Okay? And that has nothing to do with whoever says a damn thing, but I'll say if you're a confrontational person, you can shame a lot of people out of being a jackass to you. I'm just going to say that. All right. And before you begin, it's always good to think about what self-love looks like to you, like what the version of yourself who loves you feels like. What kind of life do they have? What kind of friends do they have? What kind of family relationships do they maintain and are mutually maintained? Okay. Is my religion, is my culture, is my job compatible with that version of myself? These are the questions you got to ask yourself. Okay, so step one, since we know that they are actions now, what actions does a self-loving person take? What actions does a self-lover avoid? Make a list if you have to, but I just want you to think about that in any instance where you feel triggered or any instance at all. Think about, how would a self-loving person think about this situation right now? How would a self-loving person react to this situation right now? And then you start to implement those behaviors and thoughts into your life. Step two is, I basically said it, but extending on how does a self-loving person think, you also want to think about, how does a self-loving person confront self-critical thoughts? Because self-critical thoughts are good. You know, they're not always self-deprecating by default. They help us improve ourselves, and they help us reach self-acceptance and grow for more improvement. And so understanding when you have even if you can't see yourself doing it, imagine the most confident person you know, or the most confident person you wish you knew, and imagine how they would react to having the same thought or feeling as you. How would they take care of themselves? And try it out for yourself. Okay, step three is, what are some ways you can start acting with self-love in your life based on the above? So basically what I just said, you start to implement behaviors. And if you're like, really intimidated, you can start with something small and private. You don't have to involve other people all the time. You don't have to involve like an environment where you feel perceived. In fact, I would say begin with something simulated even. I always love in shadow work, I always love like the use of dolls. Like, I think it's so good to have people like be objective over the behavior and see themselves in a way that they were refusing to see before, or just couldn't see before. But I know it's not for everybody. Not a lot of adults are comfortable playing with dolls. Step 4 is implement these actions. Like I said, start doing them. That's the important thing. Don't think too much about what will happen when you do them. Okay? What's more important is that you do them. I would say if you're like me, you procrastinate a lot, and you put things off, especially when they're new, I would say just pick one behavior and try it out for a week. Every day that week. And journal about your results. Journal about how you felt. How did it make a difference? Did it affect other behaviors? Did you start implementing different actions that were in the same current of self-love that you were at the time? Or did they improve? Did they get worse? Did that method not work for you? It's different for everybody. Okay. Step 5, what are some things about yourself right now that you love? How are you accepting or making space for acceptance of the things you're not currently able to change about yourself? All of us have things about ourselves that we're not able to change at all, such as our physical appearance most of the time, unless we have a shit ton of money. Or sometimes we have genetics that affect us. That's just part of life. That's fine. Sometimes we have something we think is going to be permanent, and really all we need to do is make space for it to discover that it's actually temporary, and we actually have a lot more agency in that realm than we thought we did. So for me, that was my depression. I was told by everyone that there's no cure for depression and da da da. And although that may be true, and I'm still technically a depressed person, I have not had symptoms of depression for a long time. And I've noticed like there were certain chemicals that I would be ingesting, like I've mentioned before, alcohol, that wouldn't help me. And I've noticed that there were other chemicals that did help me, such as marijuana. Um, and I also noticed that there were behaviors that I was doing that helped me either, handle the sort of introductory thought to my depression versus ones that would slide me all the way down into an episode, or just slide me down deep enough that, I'd be in an old pattern of thought. So I grew to understand that because of my genetics, which, depression is something that runs in my family, because of my genetics, I'm predisposed to depression. And I'll probably always have depression, technically. But I don't always have to experience depression. And when people said, depression, there's no cure. And when a depressed person hears that, like, I mean, if you're depressed, you know what the fuck happens. You get more depressed. And you just feel hopeless, and you feel like there's nothing you can do about it, and you'll never feel happy ever. When that's not true. You can still live a happy life. You can still, love life and, not feel suicidal all the fucking time, and enjoy yourself and love yourself and see yourself as valuable and have meaningful relationships with other people. While having this, mental illness. I think it's more complicated than that, but you don't have to suffer just because there's, society is like, there's something wrong with you, or you believe there's something wrong with you, or maybe there is something wrong with you. No one's fucking perfect, so self-love is not the precursor. Self-love does not require perfection. Self-acceptance does not require perfection. But I find that when people delve into self-acceptance first, self-love is much easier. So now that I've shared that, we're going to end the video because it's time for you to do it. Feel free to rewatch this video as many times as you need. Feel free to whine and bitch in the comments about how much you hate yourself. I'm not going to read it. I'm kidding. Feel free to comment any thoughts you have on the video. I'm interested to see if this reaches some non-Satanists. I'd be very interested to see what people say. But I find that this is the only thing that's really worked for me. I have had a lot of bad advice over the years, and I see bad advice being out there, so I hope this is better advice, at least for people who have my experience. I don't expect it to work for everyone. I am not a fucking licensed therapist. I'm also not your personal guru, so, please respect boundaries in comments. Thank you. I'll see y'all next time. Have a good fucking day. Or don't. It's up to you.